Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for holding. We will just be waiting for a few more folks to join and we will be starting shortly. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for holding. Commissioners, I'm going to turn on the ability to start your audio and video. Now turn on your audio and video. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right, that's good. So I have 10:05, and I think it's probably we're ready to begin. Thank you very much. So good morning. This is the public hearing on public-private partnerships in the state's response to the pandemic-induced recession. Today is September 10th of 2020. My name is Pedro Nava. I'm the chairman of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. I want to introduce the other commissioners who are with us on Zoom. Joining us today are Vice Chair Sean Varner, Commissioners Dion Aroner, David Beyer, Bill Emerson, Kathy Schwamberger, and Diana Sidley. Also with us today are the Commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foerster, Project Managers Crystal Beckham and Tristan Stein, Analyst Sherry McAllister, Ashley Hurley, and Rachel Mattioli. Thank you all for joining us. Let me do some housekeeping before we turn to the subject at hand. The Commissioner's audio and video will be turned on throughout the duration of the hearing. Commissioners, you may mute yourself if you wish. Please remember to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment or ask a question during the hearing. You'll see, as is my practice, I'll look to the screen to see if you've either raised a hand or you've unmuted yourself, and I'll take that as some indication that you want to participate or have something to say. The video and audio of our hearing witnesses will be turned on when it is their turn to speak. Members of the public will be muted during the hearing. As is standard for the Commission, we will have a public comment session at the end of the hearing. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during the public comment session. If you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. Now, there are those who have joined by phone. You may send an email to littlehc.lhc.ca.gov indicating you want to address the Commission. You must provide the phone number from which you have joined the meeting so that our staff knows who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the duration of our hearing. As is usual at Commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording today's hearing, and after the meeting, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to the YouTube channel. And now to the substance of our hearing. Oh, I apologize. Assembly Member Chad Mays is with us as well. Hello. This is the first of 2 Commission hearings on the role of public-private partnerships in California's response to the pandemic-induced economic recession. The Commission previously held a series of hearings on the general long-term economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In those hearings, we heard from witnesses who described the devastating economic impact of the pandemic thus far, and who spoke to the pandemic's disproportionate impact on certain communities, including people of color, the poor, and others. We also learned that addressing the long-term economic impact of the pandemic and encouraging equitable recovery will require partnerships between the public and private sectors. And I see that Chelsea Schilling is masquerading as Senator Nielsen.
We did quite a job of covering this, didn't we?
Well, I'll tell you that, you know, Photoshop, you can do some amazing stuff there.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm with you.
Thank you for joining us. And so if you may, we're going to focus on the impact on small business and how the private and public sectors can work together to help California small business survive and recover. The pandemic and pandemic-induced recession have had a devastating impact on California's small business. The pandemic has already wiped out thousands of small businesses around the state and threatens many more. This is of critical importance since small businesses are vital to California's economy and to the communities in which they are located. Nearly half of California's workers are employed by small business. The impact of the pandemic has, moreover, tended to be most severe on minority-owned businesses, further exacerbating the already disproportionate effect on communities of color. The pandemic has also, however, spurred new initiatives and innovative collaborations that aim to help small business survive and recover. The crisis facing small businesses prompting individuals, institutions, and organizations to work in partnership to support them. The state of California, meanwhile, has partnered with private organizations and private companies to help address the needs of small businesses impacted by the pandemic. Today, we will hear about the impact of COVID on small businesses and about what small businesses need to do in order to survive and recover. We will also hear about some of the initiatives and public-private partnerships that have emerged, excuse me, to support small business. We will be holding an additional hearing on public-private partnerships in the state's response to the pandemic recession in 2 weeks. And we anticipate making recommendations in the months to come about ways the state can encourage and sustain greater public-private partnership in promoting equitable recovery. This hearing was organized by Tristan Stein, who I see is wearing a tie. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, if I hate to.
How are you?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
but before we introduce the first witness, I might note that I believe also Assembly Member Quirk may in fact be on the line. I'm not sure if that is in fact his Chief of Staff, Tomasa Duenas, or the Assembly Member. Assembly Member Quirk, if you are in the meeting, you're more than welcome to turn on your video and audio and join us.
Thank you.
But I just wanted to note that he may in fact be attending.
Thank
My
you.
apologies, Mr. Chairman.
No, that is all. I want to make sure that everybody who's attending and participating is recognized. So going back to Tristan, he joined our commission staff as a project manager just a few months ago, and I'd like to ask Tristan to introduce the first witness, who will speak directly to the impact of the pandemic-induced recession on small business and on what is needed to support small business recovery. Tristan, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our first witness this morning is Blane. Ms. Blane is a founder and the CEO of Infusion Partners 360, a home infusion nurse registry that partners with registered nurses and infusion pharmacies to serve patients requiring infusion therapies at home. Ms. Blane is a registered nurse and received both her Bachelor's of Science in Nursing and her Executive Master's in Healthcare Administration from the University of Southern California. Ms. Blane was presented with the Spirit of the Entrepreneur Award from the Inland Empire Center for Entrepreneurship in 2014, and she has also received the annual Faith-Based Business Award at the Inland Empire's annual Faith-Based Business Summit. Ms. Blane, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Again, I'm Kenya and I'm the co-founder of Infusion Partners 360. Good morning, everyone, chairman and members of the commission. Thank you for having me today. Infusion Partners 360 is a nurse registry located here in Corona, California, although we do service the entire state of California. I'm often asked, what is a nurse registry? My simple explanation is that a registry is like a staffing agency for nurses. However, it's in the traditional business model, nurses staff the hospitals. For us, we specialize in contracting nurses who are experts at delivering medications by injection, more commonly referred to as infusions. Instead of the services being performed in the hospital, the nurses provide the infusions in the home setting. And as a registry, we coordinate their temporary work assignments on behalf of our clients who are specialty pharmacies, home health agencies, and infusion centers. As you can imagine, COVID-19 began to soar and healthcare facilities were forced to radically reshuffle personnel. The nursing shortage was definitely amplified, and suddenly we were in a new frontier where all experienced medical professionals were needed to combat this deadly virus. As far as the impact of COVID-19 on IP360, the pandemic has caused my company to have to pivot strategically and make adjustments as we rethink and reimagine how we would do business in order to survive. Our priority has been our commitment to keep nurses and patients safe during the crisis. So as such, we had to implement new processes adherent to the recommendations of the CDC and WHO organization to prevent the spread of the virus out in the field. Due to the governor's stay-at-home order, like many businesses, we also had to reroute quickly our internal workforce into a virtual environment within 72 hours. Ultimately, our biggest impact was the decrease in referrals and revenues that we received during this time. we actually experienced a drastic decrease in the number of referrals we received. Our business went from 8 to 15 referrals per day to a dismal 0 to 3 referrals per day. In addition, our pharmacies reduced the number of referrals to us, and several factors came into play that impacted our nursing network capabilities. We had nurses that did not want to enter a patient's home for fear of contracting the virus. We had nurses who did not want to provide services unless they were given hazardous pay. We experienced patients who created demanding environments for nursing that made it impossible for us to service them. And some patients began to request nurses who were not concurrently working in the hospital. There were also other instances where clients did not want to refer to us because their PPE supply was limited and they did not want to provide PPE for our nurses in our registry. So we noticed they began to hire more nurses within their own organizations and keep their referrals and keep their referrals to their staff. Overall, our business situation, it looked different. As a company, we have been compelled to explore different ways to redefine our value proposition and look closely at the value we deliver with our service. We have been assessing unmet needs within our industry and assessing solutions that can last beyond the pandemic. This extensive introspection has resulted in creating new service offerings, which has yielded 2 businesses, a home health agency and an ambulatory infusion center. Both would be able to provide alternative sites for therapy, which alleviates the pain and anxiety related to COVID-19. In addition, we had to create new value with existing assets. Specifically, we had already purchased software that would enable us to offer telehealth services. We simply needed to maximize the software and begin offering patients virtual visits, which would help specialty pharmacies in lowering their needs for nurses to go to the patient's home. We thoroughly outlined our plan for the 2 new business entities. So the question is, how did we actually survive? With decreased revenues from the decreased referrals, we survived because thankfully we were able to receive, unlike many of our colleagues, assistance in the form of SBA deferments, the PPP loan and the EIDL loan. Typically, with a drastic decrease in referrals, we would have been forced to scale back to match the amount of business coming in, which may have included laying off employees. I'm sure that would have happened. But instead, the PPP loan allowed us to keep our staff as the industry shifted and adapted to new protocols and ways of conducting business. Now we are starting to see a slight increase in referrals again. And in addition to the COVID-19 relief funding, we understand that our abilities to sustain would not have been possible without the help of those in our professional network, which includes Hilda Kennedy and her team at AmPac Business Capital, Frank Fabella, my business coach and mentor, Vistage Worldwide Inc., my peer mentoring organization, and my CPA, Richard York, who ensured that our finances were organized and that we were bankable and loan ready, and a host of other colleagues who helped to shape our thoughts on restructuring and pivoting to stay alive. We would not have been able to survive the pandemic without this support. For businesses who do not have access to financial means for whatever reason, or a valuable professional network to support their companies, I recommend that the state adopt more educational, more peer mentoring and financial resources for small and micro businesses to endure an economic crisis that may come about in the future, like COVID-19. This is a short synopsis of my experience, and thank you. This concludes my testimony.
Thank you for your comments. Let's open it up to commissioners who may have some questions and might want you to expand on some of what you said. Do I see Commissioner Byer?
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you for your persistence in the pandemic and the service that you render to patients who need infusions at home. My question is, could you describe for us what an ideal loan situation or scenario might be under the state's sponsorship if you were going to seek a loan from a community development financial institution? In other words, you have a CDFI, community-oriented bank, and how hard is it to deal with them compared to a major bank like Bank of America or Wells Fargo? Why would you go to a community bank as opposed to a big bank? What's your experience been?
I actually do have experience in this area. I've been in business for probably about 15 to 18 years now, and I started off not having much information about the smaller community banks, trying to interact and deal with big banks like Bank of America. It was very trying for myself. Community banks are more personal. You get to share your story. You get to connect the dots, if you will, with Bank of America or banks like with larger institutions. You don't have that opportunity. So if something doesn't check the box, you're just automatically disqualified without being able to really share your experience or what happened or your story. So community banks have been very helpful in strategically providing educational resources that helps you to align your mishaps with where you're trying to go. And they have been very accommodating and just having that time to really spend with you to lead you in the direction that you need to go.
Just a quick follow-up question. If you could, based on your experience or what you've heard from colleagues in the small business community, describe the role of fees for applications, interest rates, and loan forgiveness. In other words, what's been your experience with the community development financial institutions on those kinds of dimensions of borrowing money? Is it easier with them than the larger banks? Is that what you're getting at?
I do believe that it is easier with smaller community banks than larger banks. The fees are, they're not bad in comparison to. And there was a third component that you wanted me to address.
Loan forgiveness or repayment rates.
I think that's directly correlated with credit. That seems to have been my experience, but the options are there. Sometimes they've been slightly higher, but as you know, your personal background or your situation advances, there's definitely opportunity for the rates to be more accommodating.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And just let me mention that Assembly Member Bill Quirk, who is Commissioner, has joined us as well. Welcome, Assembly Member Quirk. Do we have any other questions from Commissioners? Ms. Blane, I hear Assemblymember Quirk. Oh, all right.
Yeah, by the way, I had technical difficulty joining with the original link that was sent, but I'm on now, so.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you have any questions or comments of the witness?
I didn't hear the first part because of the technical problems.
Oh, all right, my apologies.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other, I'm sorry, Mr. Varner.
Yes, Ms. Blane, you indicated that you recommend educational resources that are needed for small businesses in California. Do you have can you give us a little bit more detail on what your thoughts are? You mentioned that I thought it was the resources you have are a testament to your business acumen that some people may not have, and you indicated that you have a CPA and obviously with Hilda and others and with Vistage. Do you have just some more specifics as the type of education or prioritize what you think small businesses in your position might need?
They need education about understanding the role of having a team that is almost very similar to a peer of advisors or that understands business. A lot of times small business owners, they get into business behind something that they're passionate about or that they feel they can make a difference, but they don't really understand the important elements, as you mentioned, the business acumen that is needed to be successful. And a lot of times they just lack that understanding. So I believe that at some point where new business owners can be met in understanding the importance of business concepts, putting the aces in your places, building your team, being bankable, keeping your books in order, understanding what your books, your financial statements mean. All of these are very important. Knowing that you don't know everything, but knowing when to go ask for help or seeking professionals to help you and doing things right legally, having a solid foundation. All of these principles will help your business be successful the sooner you understand that these things are essential for having a successful business. So education around surrounding these principles are definitely important. You know, I am a part of Vistage and I understand the value. It comes with a cost, but I believe if similar services were available that didn't have such a substantial cost to help support business owners, that would be extremely beneficial for small business owners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm curious, and I see other commissioners, but how did you do it? And you make reference to networking and peer mentors. You know, the area of nursing is complicated and difficult. I have a background as an attorney who practiced medical malpractice defense for about 15 years. Mr. Emerson has a background in healthcare, and I'm sure there are others who have had that kind of exposure. So nursing is really a complicated, difficult, and very nuanced profession. And so what was it that brought you into it, and how did you learn of the things to build it so that you could have a business?
I would say intrinsically, I've wanted to be an entrepreneur. I thought I wanted to be in the medical field as a physician, but to make a long story short, I recognized that I wanted to become a nurse. And then some opportunities that I had early in my career led me into this nurse staffing registry. And that's how everything evolved. But for some reason, I've just always wanted to attach myself to people, or I wanted to seek wisdom. I wanted to know how to do it and how to do it right. So that created my natural ability to attach myself to people who could help me be successful.
Wonderful, thank you. And congratulations on your initiative.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. Anybody else? Additional questions for this witness? I don't see anybody unmuted. So that usually is a signal for us to have a conversation with our second witness. And what I would suggest, Ms. Blane, if you have the time, you can remain, with us. It may very well be that as we move through this, commissioners may say, well, I want to kind of ask Ms. Blane some questions about what she did and how she did it. So you're welcome to stay. You're an entrepreneur. You might have some other places to be. So if you have to go, we understand. But again, thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you. And I am able to stay.
Thank you. So Ethan, if you who's going to introduce the next witness?
Mr. Chairman, I'll ask Tristan to go ahead and introduce Ms. Kennedy.
So is that how you want to do this?
Yeah, he will handle the witness introduction.
That's great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ethan. Our next witness is Hilda Kennedy. Ms. Kennedy is founder and president of AmPac Business Capital, which is an Inland Empire-based certified development company and community development financial institution. AmPac has funded more than $500 million in loans for small businesses over the past 15 years. In addition to her role at AmPac, Ms. Kennedy is actively involved in the Inland Empire community and is a member of the Board of Trustees for Cal Baptist University, Riverside, and has served as president of the National Association of Women Business Owners, both locally in the Inland Empire and statewide. Ms. Kennedy, please.
And Ms. Kennedy, before you start, I should let you know I graduated from, well, actually, I went to Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic School in San Bernardino, and then we moved to Fontana. So I graduated from Fontana High School, and then I went to San Bernardino Community College, and then ended up graduating from San Bernardino State. So I kind of feel like we've been in the same territory.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's great. I feel like I'm in good company then. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. To the esteemed members of the Little Hoover Commission, Chairman Nava and Vice Chairman Varner, I want to especially thank Commissioner Varner for inviting me today. I also want to acknowledge staff member Tristan Stein, who has been wonderful to work with, and we've spent a lot of time on the phone. It's my pleasure to address the Commission at this time in our history. I read a little bit about the Commission's 58-year history to promote the efficiency, economy, and improve service in state operations. And today I'm going to address the three areas that I was asked to talk about: the needs of small businesses, how Cdfi serves small businesses and underserved communities, and some solutions on how the state can work with nonprofit and for-profit entities to support small businesses. The pandemic has separated the wheat from the tares in terms of the small business community, if I can use that biblical analogy. And we've seen certain small businesses hurt far more than others. While there are numerous statistics about the needs of small businesses, there were some really positive growth trends for small and especially the growth of minority small businesses pre-pandemic. But what we've seen are the vulnerabilities of small businesses that have been evident in the pandemic. Wealth and income gaps are the difference between whether a business can survive a shutdown, an economic downturn, or a pandemic. Research from the Center for Responsible Lending documented that many small businesses based in communities of colors don't have wealth that can absorb the shock of an economic downturn. Adding to these vulnerabilities, according to the Federal Reserve survey, 21% of non-Hispanic, Black, and African-American businesses were financially distressed at the end of 2019 based on metrics like earning, profitability, credit, versus only 5% for white-owned businesses. And most businesses in these communities, the survey showed, had less than 14 days of a cash buffer at the end of 2019. So that's very telling about what would happen when you come into 2020 and face a pandemic. So Chase Bank Institute did a study that reported that lack of cash and reserves was even more severe than we initially predicted. And in Black and Hispanic communities, it was really telling. And I want to share the numbers. They noted that 6% of businesses in majority Black neighborhoods would run out of cash in less than a week. 89% would run out of cash in 7 to 14 days, and 5% 14 to 21 days. And just start counting the days of the pandemic. Businesses in majority Hispanic neighborhoods, 1% would run out of cash in a week, 88% in 7 to 14 days, and 11% in 14 to 21 days. Contrasting that with businesses in majority white neighborhoods, 29% may run out of cash 7 to 14 days, 57% 14 to 21 days, and 14% would have cash that could last them more than 3 weeks. And note that none of those stats said that Black or Hispanic-owned businesses had cash that would last more than 3 weeks. So while many businesses like Kenya's receive resources from the CARES Act through PPP loans and EIDL loans, a survey conducted by an equal rights group called Color of Change in US Unidos reported that while 12% of minority businesses applied for loans, 41% were denied. And we did a study right here in the Inland Empire, and we saw very similar results. The American Banker reported that 70% of lenders have tightened their underwriting standards for loans to small businesses, and the demand for clients plummeted 29%. So tightened underwriting standards from the American Banker, and thinking about the stats of the wealth gap, that will definitely have a direct impact on small, especially minority businesses seeking access to capital. But that's been a trend prior to the pandemic. Over the past 5 years, just 23% of Black-owned businesses got credit from banks versus 46% of white-owned businesses. And drilling down further, what were the reasons for that? Lack of collateral, lack of net worth, and they tended to have less relationships with banks. Black-owned businesses, even with the support of the Small Business Administration and its flagship 7A program, a survey in 2019 and 2018 showed that only 3% of the loan volume went to Black-owned businesses versus roughly half going to white-owned businesses. There's a disparity. And although, as Tristan mentioned, we funded over $500 million in SBA loans, especially focused on real estate financing, we see the critical need in underserved communities. And that's why we establish a Cdfi so that we can better serve these small businesses and look at the underwriting guidelines differently. Our core value calls it underwriting with a heart. Which brings me to my second point about Cdfis. Given the landscape of small businesses, both pre-pandemic and in this crisis, the role of Cdfis, community development financial institutions, have been heightened. Cdfis were created to fill a financial service gap left by Main Street commercial banks. I like the way one of the Cdfis in Missouri put it, following the George Floyd riots. She described the Cdfi as the National Guard for small businesses, dispatched to fill a void that banks are unable to fill, and quite frankly, don't fill. AmPac can attest to the significant role that we played for small businesses with PPP loans and coaching and providing technical assistance to those business owners as they navigated through the pandemic. Our office took more than 200 calls a day working remotely in March when the governor issued the stay-home order. Our clients and small businesses in the community were looking for help, and they could not get help from their bank of 10, 20, or 30 years. I cannot tell you the number of calls. I tried to call Bank of America. I tried to call Wells, and I don't want to disparage those banks because they also came and they've done some incredible work. But those larger banks, they have so many customers, they could not get through. With the help of congressional leaders, AmPac, along with other Cdfis, lobbied to become PPP lenders so that we could answer the call. So from mid-March to August, when the program ended, we approved more than 200 PPP loans, funding over $3 million in loans with an average loan size of $13,000, while the average PPP loan was about $239,000. And our smallest loan was to a Hispanic-owned woman a Hispanic woman-owned business who had a little party planning retail store, and her loan was $1,500. She was so grateful to be able to get those funds, and we had numerous thank you letters from our clients. And this brings me to my final point on describing solutions on how the state can work with nonprofit and for-profit entities to support small business, especially CDFIs. Coming along the state's iBank program with FDCs, or financial development corporations, CDFIs can obtain the state guarantee for lending capital to small businesses. Having the 95% guarantee from the FDC provides additional collateral support to the transaction, especially when typical underwriting trends are lacking. We're not seeing positive cash flow in some of these businesses, but we believe they have a story. They have a plan for recovery, just like Kenya's, and we would be able to support them if we had the backing of a state guarantee. This guarantee will reduce risk to CDFIs so that they can continue to focus their attention on an area where I believe is part of our greatest value to small businesses. In addition to lending as community lenders, we provide technical assistance and coaching from the perspective of a lender. And Kenya talked about that education piece, and we as CDFIs, as part of our mission, we do that education. So if the state could provide grant funds to CDFIs to support training and coaching efforts coming alongside those businesses that we funded, we give them a greater chance for support and success for the long haul. We've been able to do that with a number of PPP clients by offering a 6-part forgiveness webinar so that they could become educated on how to do that and how to navigate these reams of regulations that we receive from Treasury and SBA. One final thing, CDFIs struggle to raise affordable capital so that they can lend to small businesses. And what we learned from the PPP program, the Federal Reserve created a liquidity facility to allow CDFIs to borrow funds at 35 basis points so that we can make those PPP loans available to small businesses. iBank could partner with CDFIs by creating a liquidity facility that allows CDFIs to borrow low interest capital, and then we can turn that around and make those loans available to small businesses at underwriting guidelines with a heart, which is different from what a bank who's regulated can do. That's the difference that we make. iBank could also consider creating a secondary market for selling loans that are backed with the state guarantees so that CDFIs can sell those loans, also adding additional liquidity. You know, small businesses remain the lifeblood of our local economy. And history is a great teacher. In 2008, during the Great Recession, small businesses lost jobs, declining 60%. A decade after that crisis, small businesses created more than 62% of all new jobs. It will take time, but small businesses are a great bet. And AmPac is betting our money on small businesses and their full recovery. CDFIs have played a pivotal role in recovery efforts for small businesses throughout the state and throughout the country. We are the National Guard for small businesses. And if CDFIs could partner with the state for liquidity capital, for state guarantees, and for grant funds, I am confident we could go a long way in saving California small businesses. Chairman Nava and Vice Chairman Varner and commissioners, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And once again, Mr. Varner has demonstrated his advocacy for the Inland Empire. by recruiting such an extraordinary witness to give us some excellent details about the services that you provide. And just, I mean, we have all read articles about what happens in some developing countries with the success of microloans and how people are able to provide for themselves and their families with just a little bit of help that is given to them, provided to them in a way that is, as you have described, compassionate, supportive, mentorship, and with education. And when you talk about a loan of $1,500, and when you think about a large institution, it costs them that much to open a file because of their administrative and because of their overhead costs. There's nothing in a large institution to assume the responsibility for administering loans of that size. So that sort of helps me to understand the role of entities like yours who are able to provide the direction and the guidance and the support for small businesses that don't have the ability to go out and hire somebody to handle paperwork. I remember when we were doing a study on Denti-Cal, and we had dentists who told us that because of the complications associated with reimbursement from the state, if they wanted to handle Denti-Cal claims, they had to hire someone specifically to process that paper, separate and apart from the other back office operations. So I want to thank you for highlighting an important aspect of the work that you do, because you really have a different universe of participation with small business, the small businesses that you're an advocate for. They need different kinds of assistance. And it is seems to me, much too easy to, this is again, my concept of the speed dial. If you've got a project that, if you're a contractor and you're going to build something, you tend to go to your speed dial. You know who to go for materials and equipment and personnel, and you don't think about other avenues because that's not what you're used to. So and I think I'm really fortunate that we've got Assemblymember Mays and Assemblymember Quirk and Senator Nielsen here, because part of what you're talking about is how do you establish priorities so that you get the biggest bang for your buck by providing the best kind of support for small businesses. And that may require a legislative initiative to push the money in that particular direction. Let me, now that I've taken up all the time, let me open this up for other commissioners who may want to participate. Commissioner Schwamberger, you look poised to do something there.
Well, thank you very much for that information. It's impressive and inspiring. And to me, it kind of, and I don't know a lot about, all of that, but it really sounds to me like with the Cdfis, we have an already existing infrastructure serving the small business community that just seems like, ripe for a solution. And my question for you, in addition to just appreciating everything you do and everything you shared, in a normal situation when we're not dealing with a disaster, a COVID-19, does it work pretty well in terms of accessibility of capital, availability of capital, such that there should be a solution considered for just times of incredible stress like COVID-19, or even in normal times, is there an opportunity to improve that partnership with the state? Or do you think it's normally okay and it just needs kind of a solution in very challenging times?
I think that the Cdfis are not commonly go-tos for the state in terms of partnerships. There are some Cdfis that are FDCs, and I'll just point out that there's no FDC in the Inland Empire, where we have the largest square miles of county space, but generally the state Cdfis are not included in the resource list of for the state. Even if you look on the website, So just that kind of information flow for iBank. What are some of the lending partners who can support small businesses? But then so if non-pandemic, CDFIs would be a good partner for the state, for iBank, for GoBiz to come along and support businesses. And if they could get support, because liquidity is a challenge for CDFIs, many of which are nonprofit organizations seeking to do this work and provide that technical assistance. So that's why the solutions that I mentioned are both pre and post pandemic. It should be an ongoing relationship. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. See Commissioner Byer.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your testimony and the work that you do every day. Let me try and elevate the conversation a little bit, first with some observations and then a question. So we've got a $21 trillion economy, and we've put multiple trillions of dollars into the economy in the form of actions by the Federal Reserve, several trillion by Congress. But it seems at this point, notwithstanding the relative success of the PPP program, we've seen inability by the federal government to come up with a plan. Today, the Senate did not take up continuation of a relief bill. Seems very likely that nothing's going to pass before the election. And therefore, the PPE program won't be continued. The Main Street lending program, which could have been applied to small business, didn't get applied. The state has acted in a bold way, I think, through the iBank, but it faces a $54 billion deficit. One of the themes for this hearing, or a series of hearings, is how to leverage assets from the private sector, from other people. That is, philanthropies, or more importantly, for the purposes of the question, from banks. In your view, and this is going to apply to the other witnesses that follow you, how do we create incentives or carrots for large financial institutions, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, to participate with CDFIs so that more money is available? The state, by providing a loan guarantee, essentially is encouraging the continuation of small businesses who will pay taxes and sustain the economy. What role should these large financial institutions play in the iBank funding process, and how do we get more of them involved at larger sums of money?
That is the key, larger sums of money. To all credit, Wells Fargo, as a result of all of the PPP loans that they did, you all may be aware that they set aside the fees that they received to go to CDFIs. So we've been involved in the funding round. We're waiting to hear results to get funds to us as a CDFI so that we can lend out affordable capital to try and save some of these small businesses. And to the extent that the state can continue to have that conversation with some of these larger banks to say, use that capital or provide a liquidity facility to CDFIs that is affordable so that they can relend the funds. You're not going to do the $1,500 loan, bank. It doesn't make sense for you, but the CDFI could and could save that business so that they can continue to sustain themselves and employ. So I think it's really important to have those conversations and to invite the participation of CDFIs that can take those funds and be able to get them to the small business. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Any additional, Dion? Yeah, please. It's Commissioner Arner. You're still muted.
Commissioner Erner, you're still muted.
I think she's looking for the button.
Yeah. Commissioner Erner, we'll have someone call your cell phone. Mr. Chairman, if there are any other commissioners who have questions, we'll have someone call your cell phone and see if we can help you.
Right. Thank you, Ethan.
With that.
So don't go away. Stay with us, Ms. Kennedy.
Chairman, I just have a real quick question for.
Of course. Yeah, thank you.
First, as you know, Ms. Kennedy, I'm proud to know you and everything you do. But just real quickly, and I think this is just for the record, could you, from the perspective of a bankable versus non-bankable loan, the businesses you're funding, to what extent are they collateralized or getting personal guarantees, or are they largely unsecured loans?
Yeah, by and large, they are unsecured because there's not a lot to secure. So they're startups or early start businesses, so they don't have the financial history that a bank would traditionally want. And they definitely don't have a one-to-one collateral coverage ratio. So having the guarantee behind it, the state guarantee, really provides that cushion, because we still have to be responsible lenders. So that's why that partnership is so significant. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that does indicate why it's so important for you to stay involved with the business, because it is unsecured, and teach those businesses about becoming bankable at some point in time, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question for you. You made reference to the CDF not on the website. You want to explain that, expand on that a little bit?
Well, I was, my point was, if you go to GoBiz or the state website and you're looking for what are the resources available for small businesses in the state of California, you won't see CDFIs listed for the state. And so, and if they're there, it's buried and it's difficult to find. So if we were active partners of GoBiz, where we're collaborating a lot, we're having regular conversation, it will help to heighten the education about what are the resources available for small businesses. Yes, the bank on the corner, the bank down the street, it's there, but they're not able to help me. Where do I go?
So so you're in conversation with GoBiz. It isn't as though they don't know who you are and what you do. And so does anyone offer an explanation for why you're not on the website as a resource?
Quite honestly, I've not asked that question. And what I would want to bring to the attention of the commission as we're talking about solutions is maybe that's one of the solutions we bring forward, that these businesses, these partners are available. Let's go after them and let them go after you.
Right. Yeah, because I don't think you'd have any problem having a link to the CDFIs. That wouldn't bother you a bit, would it?
No, not at all.
And I see Commissioner Erner is live.
Right. Well, if I would figure out to use the mouse instead of my fingers on the screen, maybe I could have, oh God, going from one machine to the next. So the banks that you've been talking about are federally regulated banks. They're not, right? But we also have state regulated banks. I don't know who they are. We've heard about them. Has anybody approached the state regulated banks? Because I'm trying to figure out how does the state have a hook, right? And we don't have a legal hook with federally regulated banks that I'm aware of, but we do with state regulated banks. So I was just wondering if Ms. Kennedy had ever, has anybody looked at that?
I think that that's an opportunity. Let me say it that way. I don't have a lot of information, but I definitely believe that's an opportunity for us to develop some partnerships.
Great, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Erner. Any other questions for this witness, or we can go to the next witness? Seeing none. Ms. Kennedy, I want to, as a former resident of Inland Empire, I want to thank you very much for your work, and thank Vice Chair Varner persuading you to be a part of the hearing today. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. So if, Tristan, you look to be ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Susan McCormick. Susan McCormick is a corporate partner at the Morrison and Foerster law firm, and she has led the Morrison and Foerster team that has co-founded the California Small Enterprise Task Force. The Small Enterprise Task Force is a consortium of legal, financial, and nonprofit professionals who are working together to connect California small businesses with the resources that they need during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to being a partner at Morrison and Foerster, Ms. McCormick is an adjunct law professor at UC Berkeley Law School. Ms. McCormick was named a California Lawyer Attorney of the Year in 2012 and 2016 by Daily Journal, and she was named the most innovative lawyer in North America by the Financial Times in 2015. Ms. McCormick, please.
Hi.
Hello.
Good morning, and thank you so much to the Hoover Commission and all the commissioners for having me here today. It is an honor. I think you heard a little bit about the work a couple, maybe month or so ago from Laura Tyson, but more importantly, I'm just honored to speak after both Kenya and Hilda, and I was able to join to hear both of them. And if I can frame my remarks today, I really feel like we are the scaffolding. We should be the back engine that's not seen or heard, so that small businesses like Kenya's can continue to operate through this time, and that Hilda and the Cdfis can really continue their fabulous work. One of the commissioners mentioned, I mean, the Cdfis, I'll get to this in my remarks, but they were a product of the 70s. And they are designed for exactly this purpose, which is deploying capital to the unbanked, to our poorest communities, which are the major employers in the state, and so can provide the largest support and the most opportunities in those communities. So to Kenya and Hilda, thank you so much for coming ahead of me and for allowing me to listen to your testimony. So I am a lawyer. I'm a partner at Morrison and Foerster. I am a corporate partner, but my specialty really has grown up since about 2001. On one hand, I represent folks like SoftBank and Temasek, and I do late stage financings. And for years, that financed work on climate change and sustainability. It started on the side and it became mainstream. I saw climate relatively early, around 2001, and then spent a number of years trying to shoehorn it into my corporate practice, starting pro bono and then expanding out. And in fact, the only reason I know about Cdfis is because Pacific Community Ventures, that is a Cdfi based here in the Bay Area, but that has expanded, I set PCV up in 1999 pro bono. And so that's how I learned about the work of Cdfis. So today, I think my testimony is going to take two different parts, which I think may be interesting. The first is really describing CASE and how CASE came about as a public-private partnership in terms of addressing some of the issues that are facing our state today. And the second is describing a little bit about the California Small Business Rebuilding Fund that we have put together and are now actively working with a lot of the folks that have been referenced, and I'll provide a little more detail on that. So in terms of CASE itself, CASE was really born of a group of people. Practically, it actually started with me and my neighbor and one of my clients. And most of the early proponents of CASE were folks who were heavily involved with me in our climate mitigation work. And the reason for that is because we had long been expecting an event like yesterday in the Bay Area, a climate event to take place and to negatively impact and significantly impact small business. And so some of us had sort of been planning and thinking about this. And when COVID hit, we realized we needed to act, and we needed to act quickly, because as both Kenya and particularly Hilda clearly articulated, climate is going to disproportionately impact our poorest communities, and COVID is disproportionately impacting our poorest communities. And so we need to think out of the box, because the normal flows of capital from banks and financial institutions to business aren't going to work. The flows of capital from the federal government are not enough, and are not actually reaching, in many cases, where they need to go to support our main streets and to support particularly our minority-owned businesses. So CASE was born of very, very, very humble beginnings. I think it's a rare example. There was no money behind it. There was no institution behind it. The first Zoom call was 5 of us, thinking that we really needed to get together and do something. And we put together criteria. The criteria were, we wanted broad diversity. And I mean diversity in every sense: diversity in terms of background, diversity in terms of race and gender, diversity in terms of age, diversity in terms of sector representation, and diversity in terms of skill set. So we reached out into our networks and asked people to join and to volunteer, because they had networks of small business, because they knew something about government. I know very little about the government and the government's functioning, because they had access to philanthropic capital, because in my case, they knew about structuring. And so it grew from that 5 to 20 to now it's about 40. And really the commitment was that people needed to sort of take on tasks each week and have them done within a week. And we were incredibly lucky. I think we lost a couple people who didn't have the desire to do it, but everybody else, we sort of had hand-selected folks, and they really stepped up to the plate. People contributed. We set up subcommittees, which each had a lead to focus on policy or to focus on outreach to the CDFIs. I'll get to how we reach the CDFIs next. To work on philanthropic funding, to work on structuring. I engaged the law firm in terms of providing all the legal support for the structuring. And so that's how CASE was born. Really very, very grassroots. I think there has been a lot of question about the governance of CASE, and I teach on governance at Berkeley Law School. Very deliberately, there was not top-down governance. And one of the reasons that I did not want top-down governance is because usually when you have an organization that is set up, a disproportionate amount of time and money is spent by people figuring out how to structure it, who is going to be in charge, how decisions are going to be made. Not that that is bad. Having that thoughtful construct around the scaffolding is a really good idea. However, in this case, being able to get resources out to small business quickly, I felt really meant that we didn't have time to do that. And we also didn't have, a large philanthropic donor or the government or, a big financial institution saying, here's some money to get set up. So almost all of these initiatives start, with some pot of money saying, here's some money, figure out how you're organized. 6 months later, they've got a nice structure. And I advise on a lot of these, but this was really designed to instead sort of have these verticals where somebody would step up who had the expertise to lead. And then once a week, we get on the call. We are very efficient in an hour. Everybody reports in. Everybody has diverse backgrounds and viewpoints. And so we reach decisions by consensus. So that is how CASE was really born. And the first thing that CASE did was, because I'm a lawyer, and there is a little bit of a heavy bent towards lawyers and organizations because they're people I know. But the first thing that we did is, we met 1 week. By the next week, we had the beginnings of a resource guide. And in 2 weeks, we had a full resource guide, because one of the things that we realized small business needed was they needed to know where the money was, how to get the money, and not just federal and state money, philanthropic money, funding from corporations. They also needed to know when the money had run out. They needed to know when to get resources to figure out how to access the federal money. And it expanded to that too. They needed questions on, should they file for unemployment versus, get more money from unemployment or versus the PPP, those practical questions. And so we put together a guide, and this is I got my firm, I enlisted the pro bono support of my firm to put together the guide. We ended up also translating it into Spanish if we had more resources. And there is a movement within the group to figure out how we can translate it into more languages, because if you are a minority community in California and English is not your first language, you are even more removed from access to capital and access to resources. So language was a priority. We got the resource guide. We convinced Facebook to, for free, provide a lot of resources around a Facebook page. We started partnering with Small Business Majority and SBCC so that we could get out and reach out to as many small and get this to as many small businesses. We coupled it and we teamed with Berkeley Law School to couple it with office hours. My idea was to have a 1-800 hotline where people didn't need to register or give us data, where they could call in for questions. By the third week of March, we had that hotline up and staffed, and we had people on it answering questions on funding, answering questions on employment, answering questions on tax. Now they're answering questions on bankruptcy. They're answering questions sort of across the board. One of the issues and the reasons we set up the hotline is these small businesses don't have resources, and they tend to be supported by lawyers who are good, but they are, they don't have the level of sophistication to, and haven't, developed the level of sophistication to understand how the loan forgiveness, loan forgiveness program works, under the PPP loan, or, so there is, like many things in our state, a mismatch between the need of the small business and the talent level at, partners at large law firms who charge an enormous amount of money per hour. So we convinced, and in my testimony, a bunch of other law firms. We would like the state support to convince more law firms to provide, for free services to staff those office hours. And we average between 100 and 150 small businesses that actually show up. They ask questions. We are now moving to a format where if we can't answer the questions, we are going to have a stable of lawyers and law firms who can provide written responses, and those are posted. So we got that up and running by the third week of March. In the process of that, now we come to the Cdfis. I reached out to Pacific Community Ventures and said, hey, we've got these resources. I said, how are you doing? And to the capital question that was asked early, they explained to me that they would usually receive loan applications for 30 in a week, and they were getting 600 requests a day. And Cdfis that were strapped for cash beforehand, before COVID hit, we're just getting decimated. And Cdfis have been, I think, a little bit neglected in our capital structure in terms of having sufficient capital even to meet the needs before COVID. But I think, as Hilda very, very correctly pointed out, in many places, urban, rural, all over the state, the Cdfis are really the only places that many of these businesses can go to get a loan, and a low interest loan, other than the alternative is your predatory lenders, right? Your alternatives are people who are really trying to, and they are out there trying to make as much money as possible on pain and desperation.
Ms. McCormack, let me interrupt you for just a moment. And what I tell our witnesses is, unlike most circumstances, when you get interrupted, it's actually a compliment with the Little Hoover, because it means that you've prompted a question or a comment from one of the commissioners, and Commissioner Byer, I think, has a question or comment.
Okay, good. I haven't even gotten to the loan part, but I'm going to be succinct.
I know, but yeah.
Mr. Byer.
Hi, Suze. I'm just trying to compete with Sean Varner, and declaration of it's not a conflict, because I have from time to time worked with Suze and have offered random advice to this particular project. But let me get to the gist of the reason we're having a hearing is the question of leverage. And I think Ms. Guzman is going to talk about a bunch of things the state is doing in the small business context and GoBiz. All of that is great. But what we're really trying to do here is to pick out examples where the state can leverage resources beyond the state budget. And so that's what I'd really like to focus on. That is, the state, I think, in the form of the board of directors of the iBank, did something really awesome by doing loan guarantees, which helps leverage things. But how do we take that initial step and get to a vision of 500 million or $1 billion of lending capacity? Because there are 3.9 million businesses in California, as Ms. Kennedy outlined, in the women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. The need far exceeds anything the state has done or even could do. How do we get access to these other assets? That's my question.
Okay. So I'll get to the meat of the matter, having given you some background. Thank you, Mr. Baer. We chose, after PCV, we reached out to Opportunity Fund. We realized there was nobody else helping the CDFIs all get together and aggregate capital. So, you know, to David's point, this can't be solved with government capital alone. This can't be solved with philanthropic capital alone. Really, what you need is a vehicle that we structured where you use government and philanthropic capital to seed mainstream capital from banks and other larger institutions to really, it's basically used as the leverage. And David's exactly right. You know, leverage point one was the state guarantee program. I will say that the state guarantee program was significantly underutilized because there was not the interest on the form, you know, from the banks and the philanthropic institutions. Basically, we were talking to the CDFIs and they say, the banks won't lend unless we cover 100%. The guarantee is either 90 or 95%, and we don't have enough philanthropic capital. And so the loan, the Small Business Rebuilding Fund that we put together is structured and designed to help raise that bank capital, that philanthropic capital for the CDFIs. Again, the CDFIs being, they already have the networks in the communities and the best conduit. In terms of what we need from the state, I really think we need four things. Number one, we need the state's megaphone. We need the state to say, yes, this is a PBLLC under Kiva microfunds. It's a pass-through entity that on-lends from financial, that takes either the government capital or the philanthropic capital, takes lines of credit from large institutions and on-lends to the CDFIs. It is structured for speed, very low cost because you don't have any managers. You've just got public charity to public charity, and then allows the CDFIs to make loans of exactly the type that Hilda was describing in specific amounts. So what we need from the state is the megaphone because we need help on the fundraising side. We need from the state access, and the task force has been very involved. I know you heard from Morris Hyson and others earlier. We need for the state additional commitment, in and outside of the budget in terms of providing guarantee, but also I'm really happy to see in the budget the 25 million of first loss capital that comes in. First loss capital, harder to finance, but has even more of a multiplier effect in terms of generating 5 times the amount of capital that can be used to borrow from banks and financial institutions. So when David says, what can the state do? There is really a very valuable role for the state here. And I think it is, to answer the question earlier, it's not just for this emergency time, it's longer term in terms of reaching into these communities to set up some of the structures. Because I mentioned at the beginning, we've got COVID now, but climate change is going to decimate these communities in much the same way. And the platform we have set up, the Rebuilding Fund, is not really a fund. It is a platform that can take all types of capital and can be easily replicated to provide this kind of support. David, did I answer your question?
Yes, but I'm reminded of a scene from Margin Call with Jeremy Irons, where he's asking this guy who's a rocket scientist to explain something, and he says, sort of explain it to me like I'm a dog, maybe a Cocker Spaniel. I speak for myself, not for my other more sophisticated fellow commissioners. The world of finance is a mystery. Loans are a mystery. And so first loss capital, loan guarantees. Let me see if I can summarize what I think you're saying and whether I've more or less got it right. So the large banks want to make sure that they get a return on their investments. That is, they lend money and they get the money back, and that permits them to lend again. But they don't want to lend to people who are a bad credit risk. Small businesses are not as strong a credit risk as Apple. So they are not necessarily going to focus on the small businesses unless they're assured that there's some backstop that permits them to have a, call it loss ratio. They're going to lose a certain amount of money. And so what the state has done is said, okay, for certain kinds of loans, we'll guarantee them up to 90 or 95%, which gives the bank a backstop so they're not going to get completely wiped out. And the first loss capital is something else. Can you just describe the difference between loan guarantee and first loss capital and the order of magnitude that you need to get to 3.9 million small businesses in the state?
Well, we're aiming, you know, sort of we go big or go home. We're aiming for $1 billion. We might, I mean, the problem is so big, and that will not, you know, solve the problem, but it will be helpful. The loan guarantee, basically you apply as a Cdfi, and exactly as David said, you have a loan that comes in from Wells Fargo, that loan comes through our fund vehicle to the Cdfis, and we take, you know, we can take multiple lines of credit from multiple institutions, and I won't go into that detail. And the guarantee, then if that is not repaid, if there's not enough funding coming from the small business, there's too high a default rate, then the state steps in and provides capital. The iBank provides capital to cover the, you know, to cover the default. First loss capital, we're actually structuring so it is on lent. So what happens is iBank is actually lending that money through the vehicle to the small businesses below. And all they're saying is that we will get paid back last. If the default rate, you know, is less, you know, than the amount of capital in the first loss, the state might get some money back in terms of repositioning. If things are as desperate as we think they are and the default rate is more in the 30% range, then the banks just get paid back on their loans first before the state gets paid. And the state is not alone in providing that first loss capital. We will be raising as much philanthropic capital as first loss capital as well. So those are subordinated notes to the senior secured notes. There is one nuance that is really important in this fund, if you can, and Pedro asked, somebody asked a detailed question that makes it different for California than New York and Chicago. We are not, when the Cdfis make the loans, they are then transferring those to an SPV, an entity that will be held by our public charity, Kiva Microsystems. They are not being bundled and sold. Almost all of the programs that came before this, they're bundling and selling the loans to the banks, which gives the banks access to an ability to call defaults and really put pressure on the small business. This has been designed so that we provide additional protection for small business. So the banks just have collateral up at the SPV level. They don't have an ability to actually go after the small business. And again, that distinguishes it between the bundling and selling of notes, you know, that led to 2008, and we saw how that worked out.
Right.
So if other people have questions on nuanced detail of the structure, that is, but I go back to what I started with, if I can end with, you know, Kenya's doing the hard work of actually running the business, employing people, you know, changing the nursing system, which is incredibly impressive. Hilda's doing the incredible work for the Cdfis. They are reaching into the community. They have developed the networks and systems. And the Cdfis have whole, PCV, when I structured it, they provide the business advisory services. They provide all of the support that the small business needs to be able to figure out, and they need more support than ever because we're in crazy town right now, economically, coronavirus, environmentally, civil unrest. They need that level of support. The CDFIs are really some of the only institutions that have the community network that can work actively with the small business. And then they also provide the loans. And the Case Fund is really sort of, we're the engine behind it. You shouldn't see us too much. You shouldn't hear from us too much. We should just help provide the support and the scaffolding so that we can aggregate that capital to get it where it is needed in our most disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I see Commissioner Sidley.
So I have a question which goes back to something you said at the very beginning about the pro bono work from law firms. And I'm wondering if in your view, there is something the state bar can do to push more law firms into this area to support people. I mean, what are, in your view, the bars? Is it insurance? Is it people don't know this need exists? Not enough tax benefits for law firms to do this type of work? Is there a role for the state bar that or state legislature to try to get more support to help these small businesses?
Yes. I committed to providing the resources through the end of the year. And for the first 3 months, it was issue, everybody sees that it's critical, and we had more interest. Interest has been waning. The reason is that the big firms, these people are in the highest demand right now. Your bankruptcy partner, your government funding partner, your tax partner, and we really need some incentives. I think the incentives can be as, seeing your name in lights. So, I want to put them when GoBiz, put out its press release, I listed all of the other firms. We use Berkeley because I didn't want this to be a MoFo initiative. Wilson and Cooley have been great. And
You just froze.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what has happened. We seem to have lost.
Yeah, it happens. That happens sometimes.
We'll work on this and see if we can get her back. But
nobody understands electricity.
In the meantime, we may unfortunately have to go to the next witness while we work on seeing if we can cover Ms. McCormick. Ms. McCormick, if you can hear us, you are no longer, we cannot hear or see you. So you might want to leave the meeting and see if you can come back in.
Yeah, your video's frozen and you're muted. All right, let's go back to Tristan.
Oh, here she is.
Yeah, sorry, you're back. Thank you.
I was saying I want to create somebody to help us create competitive pressure so that everybody feels a need. And it's not a huge lift. If we have a different firm, it's a couple hours, an hour or two once a week. So yes, I would love that kind of support. I have 3 boys who are homeschooling, and sometimes the network is overwhelmed.
That's right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
And thank you very much. And let's give credit to Commissioner Beyer for recruiting you to join with us today. I'm going to take credit for Ethan. So if we could, Tristan, if you're ready to introduce our next witness. Thank you very much, Ms. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Isabel Casillas Guzman. Isabel Guzman is Director of the Office of the Small Business Advocate. She also serves as lead on the California Entrepreneurship Task Force for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Prior to her appointment to the Office of the Small Business Advocate, Ms. Guzman was a consultant in technology commercialization and an entrepreneur. She co-founded an advisory firm focused on helping small business contractors leverage government and private supply chains. Ms. Guzman previously served in the Obama administration as the Deputy Chief of Staff at the U.S. Small Business Administration. Ms. Guzman, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tristan, for the introduction. Appreciate it so much. Chairman Nava, Vice Chairman, and distinguished commissioners, as well as members of the legislature. Thank you for the invitation today to address the Little Hoover Commission. It's my pleasure to always speak on small business. As you heard from my background, I was the Deputy Chief of Staff at the Small Business Administration. So from a policy perspective, have had quite a extensive experience in this space across capital, international trade, investments, as well as technical assistance and access to markets. So pleasure to be here today to provide some of my insights. Cal OSBA in my office was actually elevated to a director level position by Governor Newsom when he signed on, really with the intent of trying to help it leverage some of the statutory requirements around supporting small businesses. And I know that you have my written testimony, but just to provide some background on the office, I think it's helpful, especially in the context of leverage, as one of the commissioner has cited, as our office does leverage quite extensively external partnerships, federal partnerships, in order to achieve its goals. In terms of the first area, what we view our charge as is providing information and resources to small businesses. And really this is the critical point, because we talk about access to capital, we talk about access to markets, but what so many people are now really coming to find is that it's really more about connection. There's capital out there are programs out there, but a lot of communities, especially underserved communities, just do not have those connection points or awareness. Same with our Cdfi networks. It's like, it's an acronym, another government acronym. People don't know what that is, what they do, why they should even want to call them. So the information and resource is really key for our office. And so one of the main ways that we do that, actually, the legislature in 2008 had funded a network of small business centers. And so we do provide information, training, consulting, tools for small businesses directly and entrepreneurs. And especially during COVID, we've really been challenged to try to increase those assets, that bridge that we have with small businesses, to make sure that they have information and resources. Kaufman studies have repeatedly told us that the majority of small businesses, whether they're later stage or early, all have said that government hasn't helped them. And I think that's resoundingly true. Even at the SBA, most of our borrowers didn't know that it was the federal government backing their loan. The second area that we really dive into is around advocacy for small businesses, which is one of the reasons why it was important to increase the office back to a director level. We advocate for small business across private sector and government agencies as well. And so really view that as broadly, because the ecosystem is all inclusive of private and public partners. The areas that we focus on are access to capital, especially small dollar loans, which have not recovered since the past Great Recession, as well as early stage venture, because we're really committed to a California for all, making sure that the underserved small businesses, especially women and people of color, as well as veterans and rural communities, do have access to all of the capital that they need, and really connection to that capital. The other is around access to markets, because capital is only half of the equation. And I realize that's the focus of our conversation today, but it's really the revenue creation and making sure that these businesses are sound. That's really critically important. Of course, my office does partner with other agencies, with advocates across state government to help businesses access the public supply chain, but private supply chain is equally as important, and making sure that small businesses are contract ready, able to enter the marketplaces. The other key areas around international trade. Pre-COVID, we were really focused on accessing e-commerce as a way to become the new mini multinational, and make sure that more of our businesses are exporting, because those produce better jobs, better outcomes for small businesses. And so with that, we've continued to focus on e-commerce, obviously with a different lens during COVID, since it's a matter of accessing your local market as well. But e-commerce and international trade is also a really big priority for us. The last is really access to networks. And it is sort of replicating the need that I outlined on information and resources. But the access to networks is really about making sure that small businesses can participate in, incubation, acceleration, if there are innovative startups, or that they have an ecosystem of lenders or technical assistance providers that they feel they can connect with. We've tried to make sure that they have entry points as much as possible and increase that. The last area that my office is charged with is on advancing small business resilience. And really Of course, during COVID, that's become our full-time focus, but making sure that businesses are disaster prepared as well as able to survive is part of our core objective. We are the economic recovery support function lead on behalf of GoBiz broadly with Cal OES, the Office of Emergency Services. So we take that role very seriously in making sure that businesses have, for example, during the wildfires, all these tools to access the resources, know about the resources that are available to them to support them, federal or otherwise. And so those are the main areas of my office's work. I know that I had outlined several things that I believe are really critical and what we need to continue to do, as well as try to engage more in the private sector to amplify. I think you've gotten a good picture of what, you know, the economic picture is for small businesses, especially from the financial profile, the cash reserves, the credit profiles, et cetera. You know, I think it's important to always remember that small businesses are definitely the drivers of economic growth and mobility. They do create 2/3 of all net new private sector jobs and do employ half of the private sector employees. And so it's really a pathway to build wealth, you know, to create mobility for yourself and your family and your community. And so for us, it's a high priority to really keep that lens of diversity and inclusion in all of our work. They do, you know, I do think I pointed it out in the testimony, but you know, startups do have a high challenge to begin with. I mean, 20% fail in the first year, regardless of disaster. Only half survive 5 years, and only a third survive 10 years. And so when, you know, you describe those cash flow issues, you describe some of those risks that our businesses went into COVID, you know, those are real. And you know, their businesses are faced with, you know, reduced revenues on an ongoing basis. Now, COVID, of course, has amplified it extremely. FEMA data shows from natural disasters, at least, that 40 to 60% of businesses don't reopen after a disaster. You know, just the amount of cost and, you know, to recover is really huge. You know, so that's kind of the background, but knowing that and knowing that we have to act quickly in order to help small businesses, I think the immediate relief that the governor and the legislature combined have worked on to try to ensure that there's some sort of support system from the state for small businesses have been really, you know, critical. First, around the area of connecting to information and resources, I will highlight that the state actually does something in strong partnership, which leverages multiple resources, most importantly, the federal resources. We fund up to a match any federal technical assistance center in the state of California, and we do it for their expansion. That's the reference I gave earlier to the 2018 funding for technical assistance centers that the legislature did. It's $20 million a year, $17 million for technical assistance expansion, and the other $3 million is for capital infusion. So the capital infusion just goes to the small business development centers from the Small Business Administration. They, of course, are more experts in helping businesses get lender ready. Most of them work with Cdfis to help, you know, give technical assistance to those borrowers on an ongoing basis. But we also fund a bunch of other centers as well. And those range from Department of Defense, you know, USDA, Department of Transportation, as well as Department of Commerce. So the Minority Business Development Centers, the Small Business Development Centers, the veterans, you know, et cetera. So within those programs, $20 million a year, we have 86 centers, and those 86 centers provide services in 31 languages. So in terms of like really trying to reach our incredible diverse startups and small businesses around the state, they're positioned well with their capacity. They have received massive influx of demands over this past, you know, few months. But overall, these centers, you know, help businesses with direct advisory services. I know that Visage was referenced earlier as an option for technical assistance by the amazing small business owner that you had on. And I know that, you know, that's actually a great example of these centers in California have entrepreneurs in residence, basically. So there are a lot of really great advisors that can be your back office and your secondary crew of team that can help you survive any type of issue, financial or otherwise. And so those centers are funded at $20 million a year and really have been key for us to expand our state services. In addition, you know, we ourselves have launched a series of, you know, webinars and trainings, and I think to Case's point, I think that making sure that those are available and businesses are aware of those on an ongoing basis is what's really important. And so we have been partnering with lots of corporations, especially through the Governor's Task Force on Business and Jobs Recovery. So with that task force, we launched Shop Safe, Shop Local in partnership with 22 corporations who offered over 40 tools, discounts, and free tools to help small businesses navigate COVID-19, and amplified the offerings of our centers and our resource partners. And so that's been an incredible way for us to leverage the private sector to try to help us amplify the resources that exist as well as offer their own. The other thing that I'd like to speak about briefly is as well, before we get to questions, is I know we've talked about access to markets. I won't go as deep on that, but of course that's a real passion for me because again, the revenue side is just as important as the capital side. And so we continue to work on how we can better educate and get businesses supply chain ready, especially with increased infrastructure spend, and help them navigate regulation and help them as well, just access the resources that they need to get into the marketplaces abroad. The other area that I will mention though is that with what we've seen during this time period, and it might actually be a silver lining, is that small businesses have increased their adoption of technology at a really high rate. And so I mentioned in the written testimony, that there's quite a bit of folks adopting e-commerce and technology tools just out of necessity to provide support to their clients. But 36% of businesses with online tools reporting conducting all sales online. So obviously they've shifted to online. This adoption of technology will definitely bring some efficiencies into the small business community broadly, which we hope to see as a benefit long-term, but as well opens them up, globally to the world. But and then the last thing I really wanted to talk about was really access to capital, because I know that's been a major push and focus area of the commission as well. It should be, since relief and immediate money in the hands of small businesses has been critical. So the state really did act early on to make sure that we were participating in SBA's programs, which I'm really familiar with as I ran all policy and new program initiatives across the board, including our Office of Disaster Assistance at the SBA. And with that early entry, California was able to access a large percentage of the EIDL loans, the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL advances, which was the extra basic grant on top of the EIDL loan, and in addition the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. So those have all been real priorities. Obviously, we want to give forgivable loans to small businesses more than any other type of loan. At the same time, though, we knew it was important that the state stand up its own vehicle to make sure that our guarantee programs were, fully, had financing behind them, as the Small Business Finance Center at iBank did not have the type of funds available that it was going to need it. So $50 million was put in immediately by the governor to shore up the disaster relief loan guarantee program. And that is the 95% guarantee program that exists in the state of California, and which has been integral into making sure that programs like CASE and others have been able to be creative about, building up solutions for the Cdfi community. Nearly 99% of the loans put out so far in the Disaster Relief Loan Guarantee Program have been through Cdfis. So it's really a remarkable program that we specifically tried to attract new Cdfis as well to the program. So Opportunity Fund, for example, is on the list. And if you, in fact, look at the list on iBank's website, you'll see that I think it's all but one of the current lenders under the Disaster Relief Loan Guarantee Program are actually Cdfis. And so with that, I think that first $50 million was really critical. Obviously, it came out at the same time as Paycheck Protection Program, so we were driving people there. But now that has gone to the wayside temporarily, at least, we know how important this program is. So really pleased to see that the legislature collaborated with the governor's office. So thank you to the members who are on the commission who put forward that additional $75 million to the Small Business Finance Center. $50 million went to the to the guarantee program, but that other $25 million went to the program that Case was referencing. And really that rebuilding fund, which was referenced, is what make, and then the iBank's contribution of $25 million as a first loss is what made, is hopefully going to make that $125 million raise feasible. So we are looking forward to supporting as much as possible their achievement of that goal. So, I would just conclude with that, I think this is an issue that I'm passionate about. I'm glad to see that the commission is looking at this. I think there are a lot of solutions out there. There's no one quick answer. It's comprehensive when it comes to small businesses, and it definitely takes the leverage of private partners. You have over 4 million small businesses in the state of California, and having private partners is really critical to making sure that we can actually reach them. That's something the government can't do alone, for sure. So I look forward to your questions and for continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much for that. What I'm curious about is would we be able to, are you required to prepare reports with respect to performance? So outreach, contacts, that kind of thing?
Yes, correct. I report to the legislature and the governor's office on an annual basis.
All right. And those could be found on the website?
Yes, correct.
Thank you very much.
The one that's been reported was during a time period that I was not here. Obviously through June, I started in April.
Okay. Thank you very much. Looking at commissioners, do I have any commissioners who have questions or comments? I don't see. Yes, I do. Commissioner Arner.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Guzman. It's interesting. You talk faster than I ever talked because you had a lot of information. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So I'm just trying to just want to learn a little bit about the results so far, because I work with child care providers who are small businesses, family child care providers. So there are licensed providers in the state, around 30 to 35,000 of them, right? Who have tried to access a lot of places to get loans and all of that kind of stuff with very little success. So I'm interested in, because part of the discussion today is around Black and brown businesses in particular, and what's going on with them and small businesses. And so do you have any data yet in regards to, as money is going out, are we impacting minority communities, and if so, to what percentages, that kind of thing?
Yes, and I'm assuming you're talking about iBank's small business program, Small Business Finance Center, the Disaster Relief Loan Guarantee Program. Based on how they track the data, over 80% has gone to LMI, women and minorities. And so, it's definitely the focus. That's why we specifically focused on recruiting CDFIs whose mission is to provide services to the underserved. There's only one bank on that list, as I mentioned.
Thank you. Any other commissioner?
Chairman, just a real quick question.
Please.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm intrigued by what you do, because it seems like we've talked a lot about having a conduit for small business to all these resources, and you appear to be it. So I'm curious as to, one, how do we get your name out more to the communities, especially the underserved communities, and let them know that you exist? And then secondly, to what extent can private industry and philanthropic organizations assist what you do?
Yeah, and so I'll start with that. The philanthropy early on, I partnered too with Opportunity Fund and others to go out to all the philanthropy across the state, asking them to support, small business lending, and giving them data and solutions, something I worked on since SBA days, actually. And to see that response now has been incredible. They've really stepped up. I think that there's multiple ways, of course, through the lending vehicles, if they participate in the California Rebuilding Fund, that's first and foremost. But in addition, a lot of them already support the federally contracted centers that we leverage with $20 million a year from the state of California. And so that's really important that they continue to support that technical assistance. CDFIs themselves can't scale without, that support as well. So philanthropy directly to CDFIs is also great, because that gives you both technical assistance and capital. But I think, broadly, it's participating in the existing programs and highlighting to make sure that businesses are aware of them. I've also been partnering with them for the first question you asked is really nobody knows about the state services that exist or, you know, understands them in a way. Like I said, Cdfi, I remember when Tory Burch at the federal level was trying to help us get the word out on Cdfi, she's like, why did you call it Cdfi? Like, nobody, that means nothing. Like, you've named it wrong. But it's true. I mean, the government just doesn't brand itself well or market. We don't have budgets for that. And so we have to be creative. And those private partnerships are really key. So I will say that all the work that we just did on Shop Safe, Shop Local helped us get out there. We reached over 6 million with that campaign. And thanks to Nextdoor and Google and others, you know, where they really amplified as much as possible the resources that exist. And a lot of that means, you know, the programs that we support, you know, less on my office, a lot on the programs, but I'd be happy to partner to figure out how we could better, you know, get the word out to small businesses. That's my #1 objective.
So I know Hilda Kennedy testified that the CDFIs are, they not only provide the funding, but obviously what do you do with the money and you get it, and the resources that are necessary for businesses to really understand how to utilize professionals and other folks that will help them with their success. And from your testimony, written testimony, it appears you do some of the same thing in providing information and resources to businesses. And so I'm looking also in a way that that philanthropy and private industry might be able to help from that perspective as well, assist your assist your attempts to get that information, those resources out to small businesses who otherwise really don't know that it exists.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we're all trying to do that because we know connection is really probably the bigger challenge than access. So the more that we can partner with anybody on amplification, especially private partners that know how to market, that's really key. And so, you know, we are launching right now a Get Digital California campaign, building off Shop Safe, Shop Local. We already have great partners like Grow with Google and others. And so we hope to, you know, continue to put our information out there. The way we condense, I view our sites that I'm still in, you know, trying to develop, you know, to better reflect the voice of small business. I believe those just have to, you know, simply explain how businesses can navigate government, as well as note private resources externally for those who feel more comfortable in those local networks as well. So I don't think it's, you know, repetitive. I try not to be duplicative as well. I don't like that about government. So I ensure that we are working as collaboratively as possible. In fact, you know, across my centers as well, that's one of their priorities, is collaborating and partnering to make sure that we leverage each other better.
Commissioner Byer?
I'm trying to reflect on the urgency of now that is getting to scale. And maybe this is a stretch, but what I would propose is that the governor's task force on economic recovery, chaired by Tom Steyer and Ann O'Leary, convene a meeting of the mayors of appropriate cities in the state, the top 5 and selected other cities, the CEOs or responsible executives of large financial institutions and major philanthropic folks, and scale the program that you already run. Because right now we're not close to the right scale, and we are risking an economic future of the state by not acting quickly enough to provide access to capital. And I worry about that a lot, because those businesses are going to be, if lost, are not going to come back easily, especially in the minority community who have already suffered the results of systemic racism, lack of access to capital. Once they've failed, the likelihood of their getting another loan goes down dramatically. So we cannot afford to wait a month or 2 months to get things together to plus up the work that the iBank has already done and approved. So how do we get there from here? How do we have that meeting?
Yeah, and I know that efforts are happening right now with CASE, for example, on the, you know, with cities and mayors. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, to try to make sure that we're sharing more information about the rebuilding fund and letting them leverage it in a way that works. So I do think that's a great suggestion. I do chair the small business subcommittee of the task force, and so I will definitely flag that as a recommendation in terms of a convening. I know that, the governor's team had convened banks early on to discuss the multiple issues, that exist, on the mortgage side as well as everything else. And so I speak regularly with different bankers based on my relationships. I was in the banking sector with ProAmerica Bank, which was a minority serving institution, Cdfi, in Los Angeles. But it's important that we continue those conversations. So I'll continue to reflect on that and how we can leverage the governor's task force to do that as well.
Also, we have some current members of the legislature who might be helpful.
Yes, I would greatly appreciate their assistance. And I will note that our team did expand. The legislature, did approve last year's budget with the governor's budget, a expansion of the office so that we could have a better team in regionally. So I do have a Central Valley regional lead advisor that was just appointed by the governor a couple months ago. And now he just appointed the Northern California, and Southern California will hopefully come soon as well. So those players on the ground locally are really going to help glue together the ecosystem and get the state support back out there.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from commissioners? I want to thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your work, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to Ethan. I think at this point in the agenda, we have to, we can check for public comment.
We can, Mr. Chairman. For members of the public who are on the call, if you wish to make public comment, please use the raised hand function in Zoom. That instruction is on the screen now, or you can send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. That email is on the screen, littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. If you're emailing, indicate your name and the phone number from which you have joined the meeting so we can recognize you when it is your turn to speak. As is usual with the Commission's hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per commenter, so please limit yourself to 3 minutes. At this point, I'll ask Ashley if anyone has used the raise hand function in Zoom.
No, we have no public comment on Zoom.
Okay, and Rachel, has anyone emailed at this point to tell us they wish to make public comment?
No, we have received no emails.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think then we can, we have no public comment at all.
Thank you very much. Normally, so we've concluded the witness testimony. I kind of think it might be beneficial, assuming commissioners are still inclined, and if not, then you're not. Whether you want to emphasize some things you heard today, information that you think staff should seek, or just because normally what happens is we get this testimony, commissioners raise questions, staff listens to sort of the things that we've pointed out, but this might be an opportunity for commissioners who feel that they want to either comment or indicate to staff that directions to take or questions to pursue. And I'm not saying you have to, obviously, but if you want to, this might be a good time to do it.
Mr. Chairman, I will just note for the benefit of the commission that we do have another hearing in 2 weeks on September 24th on a similar discussion of public-private partnerships that focused on job retraining programs and the use of resources outside of the state budget with regard to job retraining. But in any event.
But no, thank you very much. All right, everybody looks satisfied, happy, and pleased. That's exactly how you want a meeting to be. And I want to thank you, Ethan, for the suggestion that Tristan participate and be involved. I do think it's really helpful for all of the commissioners to have an opportunity to see the staff, especially since we have a number of people who have been hired recently. And so I just think that's a good idea, particularly since staff does so much of the work, that they have a chance to be recognized and to participate. And terrific lineup today, folks. Great witnesses. I think very, very helpful information. And from people who actually have are engaged and involved and have insight as to what it is that we need to do, what the state needs to do to help them do what they want to do. Having said, oh, sure, Commissioner Arnold.
Yeah, a couple of things. For those of us that have not been involved in financial institution discussions over the years, right? We've had different subject matters that we've been interested in. It would be helpful, I think, a couple of things, to have a glossary of terms in this case, right? And not necessarily in the report, but maybe before that, right? So as we go into our next discussion, because we had lots of alphabet soup today, with presumptions that we all knew what that alphabet soup was. So that would be helpful. And also, it might be helpful also to have a listing of the different resources that we think are currently available in regards to small businesses. I'm talking about on the capital side, right? Because, you know, there's federal dollars available. Obviously, there seems to be some state dollars available. Whether or not there are local dollars, I'm sure there are some jurisdictions locally that are putting in money, but as much information as we could have about that would be helpful, I think. To be able to understand what the, you know, I mean, there's first of all the size of the problem and how big is it, but then the question is what, how much are we filling with the current revenue streams that are out there, whether they're federal or state or private, because we talked about philanthropy today, and private and, you know, banks and all of that. And so if there's any way of putting that together, that would be helpful.
We can certainly do both of those things, Commissioner, and we will.
Thank you.
And I think what Commissioner Arner raises is what I'm curious about, and I've got a feeling it's not really an easy, there's no easy answer. So when I go to CarMax and I buy a car, there's a regimen that they follow. They provide me with certain documents in a certain order. And in fact, they have a section, and I only know this because I just bought a car last week, what they call the signing table. And you go to the signing table and there's someone that you haven't worked with before, but whose responsibility is to provide you with all of the disclosures, the loan document, the service agreements, everything that you're going to leave there with in one place, one packet of my CarMax documents. So if I'm what I'm curious about is if I'm a small business owner and I'm going to start up my business, how do you have any idea, and maybe Sean, maybe you probably have a better sense of this than I do. How do I have any idea what it is I'm supposed to do? Okay, I want to open up a bakery. I'm going to make cupcakes for people. I'm going to do a nursing registry, right? Unless you know somebody who's already in that industry that can be your mentor, and maybe that's how it happens. How do you know how much stuff that you have to do? Where do you get orientation to rules and regulations about operating your particular business? Okay, safety rules, health rules, licensing. Where does all that come from? And it just occurred to me as we were going through this hearing, how do you make that as simple as possible so that if I'm a business owner and I get my resources, how do I know where to go? Who am I supposed to talk to? Where do I even begin? Particularly as it relates to the role that the state of California plays. And I see Sean, you're unmuted.
Yeah, it's a great observation and something that I've actually guest lectured on. And how do you got a passion, you know what you want to do. You might be good at it. You might be great at baking cupcakes, but how do I do this on a commercial scale? And so it's really, that's something that that business people generally don't know and don't like. Who do they need? Do they need an accountant? Do they need a lawyer? Do they need a banker, an insurance carrier, and these folks? And so that's something that I've been working on and potentially I'm trying to find a philanthropic way of doing that. But there is organizations out there like the SBDC, which provides that type of resource for small businesses. It's just generally people don't know that it exists. But each community generally does have an SBDC office that they can go to and ask these questions.
Okay. So I guess my question wasn't that far off. I mean, how do you get started? Where do you go? Part of this is what we heard from the last witness who talked about the offices that they had and the services they provide. And so my question is, I mean, do you document that? What are your outreach efforts? How much money do you get to do outreach, or do you have to rely on a private commercial partner to include your name and your email address and your website? I just think if we want to encourage small business development. We want to try to keep the ones that are struggling alive so they can survive. And I just imagine that it can be extraordinarily difficult to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I think we can definitely include in the report and an additional background material for the commission for later hearings, information on those kind of topics. So.
And you said the next hearing on the 24th, that'll be focused on what?
On job retraining programs, on public-private partnership. Tristan can talk in more detail if you wanted, but on public-private partnership and the use of private resources for job retraining and reskilling programs for workers that will allow people to move into better jobs.
Okay. Any questions or suggestions from commissioners about that topic? Tristan looks really eager to hear from us.
Well, I'm hoping you're going to be talking to the unions about their apprenticeship programs and things like that, because those are true public-private partnerships, right? And also talking to community colleges who have, a significant role to play in listening and working with businesses, right, as to what are the jobs of the future and who needs to be retrained. So.
Correct, and we have already reached out to those folks and will continue to do so as our research goes forward. So there will also be, Mr. Chairman, we will provide the commission with an additional background memo prior to that hearing within another week or so, and then we have requested written testimony as we received from today's witnesses for the witnesses who are scheduled for the 24th. So we will have more information prior to the 24th.
Okay. All right, I think that probably concludes our business. And Bill, wait, I did get to see your granddaughter back in the corner a little bit. That's got to be a delight. Anyway, thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.